Hey everyone, today's guest is Tom H. Armbruster, who's a career Foreign Service officer who served as the U.S. ambassador to the Marshall Islands, Moscow's nuclear affairs officer, and diplomat in residence in New York, and today leads State Department inspections worldwide, all while publishing leading thought pieces on nuclear and diplomatic strategy. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Well, I'll let you share your story because usually when you serve in the Department of State or in the military, there are a bunch of different interesting stories that can resonate with many listeners. So I'll let you decide what you want to focus on and give your background.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons I joined the Foreign Service was the adventure. And the one story that people seem to enjoy, especially college students, is when I was serving in Finland, I had an opportunity to kayak from Finland to then Soviet Union with a group of Finns. And no matter what I did in nuclear affairs or at the UN or anywhere else, usually the first question is, well, tell me about that kayaking trip. That's the kind of thing you can only do, I think, in the Foreign Service. You go to places and you find yourself, horseback riding along the Rio Grande or bike riding in Cuba. It's a great opportunity for adventures. So I'll say that's sort of what got me hooked on the Foreign Service. I do want to update on my current whereabouts. I'm not at the Inspector General's office now. I retired in 2016, went to the IG, inspected Mauritania, Nepal, Bangladesh, Colombia, Denmark, left the IG after COVID and worked at Fort Meade for a while. And then at the United Nations, also a stint in Tonga for 5 months to get that embassy up and running. And now I'm doing some gigs at military bases for a company called RDR. So sort of bouncing around in the foreign policy space, but still active in it and still enjoying it very much.
Nice, nice. So, what's your story of getting into foreign service? Did you want to do it since you were a kid, or did it evolve and you kind of shifted into this role? So, what's the background there?
Yeah, I meet so many people who know in their bones that this is what they want to do. I was not one of those people. I was a high school kid and I met a family that was getting ready to go to Moscow. They were distant cousins of mine, Gil Calloway. He ended up being the press secretary at the embassy in Moscow, and I was babysitting his kids. And he invited me to come live with them and be a nanny. So 1975, 1976, I lived in Moscow with Gil and his three kids. I watched them during the day. I also had a job at the Anglo-American school as a gym teacher. But I saw this whole world in the embassy where there were Marine security guards. The diplomats went off to Murmansk and, had talks with the Russians. It was fascinating. And I got hooked on it then. Um, Came back home, got a degree in political science, and then took the Foreign Service exam several times before I got in. So it was really serendipity to get into the Foreign Service and to learn about it. I never knew it was an avenue open to me. And I think for some of your viewers, they may be thinking, well, this isn't really a career for me, but have a look at it. Careers.state.gov is a very rich website, and it'll take you through the test and all the various career paths that they have in the State Department. But it's really open to everybody. That's the bottom line.
Hmm. An interesting story. So you said that you lived in Moscow in the Soviet Union in 75, which was before it opened up more to the Western world. How was it living there as an American, as a future diplomat?
Mm.
Um, was it like scary, like KGB, looking after you or whatever? How was that?
Yeah, there was that atmosphere of repression. I was in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, just carrying a sweater, and I got picked up by the authorities because they thought I was going to sell it on the black market or something. I had people pass me notes on the buses and subways saying, I need help. Contact your embassy. Here's my address or phone number. There was this pervasive feeling that the state was watching you. But at the same time, for me, it was fascinating to start to learn the language, to meet the people, go to the Bolshoi, go ice skating in Gorky Park. So there's this very rich culture, the opportunity to travel on the trains and the subways. So a fascinating place and some really great people. But at the same time, I had just a little tiny window into the intrigue, and it was intense. The Cold War was a serious rivalry. And you saw that at every turn. Some of the positive things, though, I also saw the Apollo Soyuz astronauts. They had a reception for them at Spaso House. This was one of the first cooperative space missions between the US and the Soviet Union. And it was a great hit. So it showed that it was possible to make progress. And I think in the 90s, after the Soviet Union fell apart, there were a few years when we saw it was possible for Russia to join the Western world. Unfortunately, that's not the path they have chosen. But, I still have hope based on the fact that they're very talented people. Not everybody believes that, the Putin line. And I have hopes for Russia, but man, it's been a long, tough road for them.
So you also had a chance to serve in Moscow in the late 90s, right?
Yes.
So what did you do then? I think it was around some nuclear stuff, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, as I said, this was a period when there was some hope between the US and Russia. My job was nuclear affairs officer. So on the civilian side of nuclear issues, we were working to provide the Russians with cameras and security systems in their nuclear plants and to talk to them about, what do we do with plutonium? It's a problem for both countries. At the time, we were also buying highly enriched uranium from the Russians, blending it down to low enriched uranium and burning it in US nuclear plants. So this was kind of a win-win thing, providing them with money. There was talk about, not only talk, but there were plans to reform their nuclear cities. Whereas in the United States, we would build a fence around the laboratories. In Russia, they basically closed the cities that were nuclear cities. So Sarov, also known as Arzuma 16, good example. This is a city where there's scientists and teachers and everybody, and basically they couldn't really travel without a permit. And we wanted to go in and make those scientists move from the weapon side to the civilian side. So there were big plans to help Russia change and reform, mostly led by the Department of Energy. But I was the guy at the embassy who would take, for example, Congressman Domenici to the nuclear cities, go to all the talks, and basically spent most of my day at the Ministry of Atomic Energy. And as I said, there was some hope then. We made some progress, but it's all pretty much gone backwards.
Th- Thank you, Ambassador. So you said that you had a chance to live and work in Russia in the late 90s. Before that, you had an opportunity to live in Leningrad in 75. What were the lessons or insights that you learned back then about either Russian culture or something that Americans didn't or don't understand till this day about their culture? Hey guys, I just want to say thank you for watching this video, for supporting me. The best way to help me and this channel is by subscribing and liking this video. It takes just 2 seconds to do this. If you can comment under the video, ring the bell, that will help me tremendously. And now back to the video.
Yeah, I think I think the importance of language, and this is something I learned in the Foreign Service, not just professionally, but for families. People with the best morale and people really that were the most successful at work were the ones who really worked on a language. Russian in particular is a tough one, but it's one where if you speak to Russians in their language, they really respond to it. So I think that was the first big lesson is devote the time to really understand the language, and you'll benefit from it quite a lot. Um, Culture is very rich in Russia. The ballet, just traveling, um, Russian literature. So I learned a lot there, and but it was still in this context of the Cold War, where we had Russia as a perceived number one enemy. And so it was kind of shocking when you had a nice interaction with somebody as a human being, because you're so used to that confrontational approach, and this veneer of Russia as just this tough superpower that wouldn't budge on things. So it was eye-opening in that they were real people, but I also saw that system is just not designed for human beings. It's the human rights of a system like that are just abysmal. really.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go into your service as U.S. ambassador to Marshall Islands, what were you focused on in between Moscow and Marshall Islands?
Yeah, sort of a typical foreign service progression, progression. I went from Finland, where I was working on supplying the embassy in Moscow and consulate in Leningrad with supplies from a warehouse in Finland. So that was basically an administrative job. Everybody in the foreign service has to then do a consular job where you're working on visas, you're helping American citizens in prison or in trouble, and that's mandatory, and it's good because you learn a lot about other cultures in a consular position. You learn how to say no. I think it's a good requirement that people do a consular tour. So my consular tour was then in Havana, Cuba. So went from actually went from Helsinki first tour to Havana, and then Havana to Moscow for the nuclear affairs job. Um, Also served in Mexico in Nuevo Laredo on the border. That was I was consul general. Sort of felt more like a sheriff because we had a lot of American citizen cases of murders and drug cases, and something like 30 or 40 prisoners in the two prisons that we managed actually on the Mexican side. Went to Tajikistan as deputy chief of mission, and then the United Nations, then Vladivostok as consul general. That post has since closed. Um, New York as diplomat in residence at City College, where Colin Powell had gone to school, and then Marshall Islands as ambassador there.
So let's talk a little bit about Marshall Islands and your position there, your experience. For those who don't even know where Marshall Islands is on the map, what's the story of this nation, and what was your experience being an ambassador there?
Yeah, I was one of those people who really didn't know where the heck the Marshall Islands was located. I got the map out, I got Google Maps, and I was looking at it and I thought, well, Google Maps must be wrong. I mean, it can't be that small. But it's an atoll nation. It's the remnants of a volcano. So the land mass is about the size of the District of Columbia. There are about 60,000 people there. Very small place, but it's a tropical, you know, wonderland. Lots of fish, uh, beautiful coconuts. And you think, well, why does the U.S. even have an embassy there? Well, um, it's only 4 hours from Hawaii, flying west. And one of the big reasons is we have an army base there, Kwajalein. It's also known as the Reagan Space and Missile Defense Base. And that's where we fire missiles from California into the Marshall Islands for testing. These are intercontinental ballistic missiles. So it's got this very important defense component. It was used as a testing ground for nuclear weapons in the 1950s, 60 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. And that left a legacy of, naturally, of distrust and a lot of other things, but it also meant that the United States had this special relationship with the Marshall Islands. We provide for their defense, we provide money for education, for development, for health, and that's all part of this nuclear legacy as well. We do the same for Micronesia and Palau. So these very small Pacific countries that you would think, why is the U.S. involved? Well, we've got a lot of history with them, going back to World War II and even further back. But now they also play an important role in the China-U.S. competition in the Pacific. China very much wants to be uh, as far out into the Pacific as they can get, and the U.S. naturally wants to counter that and have our own influence there. So they're interesting places, complicated even further by climate change now, because Marshall Islands is maybe one of the 3 or 4 most vulnerable countries in the world to sea level rise. And it's a real threat. They're only 12 feet above sea level on for the most part. So very vulnerable country. But as I said, tiny place. Most people haven't heard of it, but it was a privilege for me to serve there, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the map, and this place looks, I mean, strategically important in this, deterrence against China. It's like somewhere in between Hawaii and mainland Asia, direction of Philippines. So it seems very important. And since the US has a military presence there, it makes sense why the US is involved there. Just curious, as an ambassador, do many people from like native to Marshall Islands immigrate to the US or get visas or anything like that?
Yeah, part of the Compact of Free Association allows Marshallese citizens to study and work in the United States. And so quite a few people have left and live, surprisingly enough, in Arkansas. Springdale, Arkansas is sort of the second capital of the Marshall Islands in a way. There's a chicken processing plant there, and one Marshallese guy got a job, and then he brought his friends and more friends, and now there are people in the police department that have Marshallese heritage. Um, they're involved in the politics there. It's quite a big diaspora, and also a big Marshallese community in Hawaii, other parts of the Pacific Northwest. But yeah, Marshallese have that privilege to travel like that, and they also serve in the United States Armed Forces. So we've had in fact we've had Marshallese who have lost their lives in American conflicts. So there's this, really tight bond and history between the two countries.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. All right, thank you, Ambassador, for that story. So once you retired from your ambassador position, and I think I had another person who also served as an ambassador in in the past on the podcast, and I think what they said is the time um, you can be involved in the Department of State is limited, and you can serve for some specific number of years or something. Is that accurate? Was that the reason why you shifted to another?
Yeah, there's several limitations. There's something called up or out. It's very much like the military. So I got to the sort of the admiral rank, the first level of admiral, and then that was as far as I got, as high as I got. The other thing is there's an age restriction. So once you reach 65, you're going to be out. So no matter how you look at it, the career is, it's prescribed but I'm very thankful to have had the chance. And I love encouraging people to take the Foreign Service exam, to look at this as a possible career because it's the one job I think that gives you the closest thing to what the astronauts have. The astronauts come back and say they get this overview effect of the world. And I think in the Foreign Service, when you travel around the world, you kind of get a sense that we are this global community and we've got to figure out these solutions to these problems as an international community. I know it's not popular maybe to say that these days. Believe me, I know the United Nations is slow and ponderous, but diplomacy is hard. But you need to work out things between countries to make progress in the world. And I think this job gives you a wider perspective. It teaches you that people all over the world are the same. There's no room for prejudice because everybody's trying to make a better life for their kids. And I think that's what's so great about this job. It's all about service. It's about trying to make the world better. And sometimes you have some wins and it feels pretty good. So on climate change, I nominated a poet from the Marshall Islands to speak at the United Nations, Kathy Jetnall Kitchener. And she just did a beautiful job, got a standing ovation, first standing ovation since Nelson Mandela. So you can see times when you really see the future and see some prospects for hope. And so I encourage people to look at this, and I'm glad you've talked about it because not a lot of people know what we do in the State Department, and they should.
And how do you become, an ambassador or get yourself into foreign service? Do you have to go to a law school or what's the path?
You don't. There's not even a college requirement. You do have to pass the Foreign Service exam, and that's fairly rigorous. Rigorous. There are written tests and an essay and an oral component. But you can find all about that at careers.state.gov. The other path is to be a political appointee, basically to be a supporter of the president, donate money, and get noticed. And for most of the time that I've been in foreign policy, about 30% of the ambassadors were political and 70% were career like me, people that worked their way up from the visa window. That seems to be shifting. There seem to be more and more political ambassadors, and we also are not filling those jobs quickly enough. And countries that don't have an ambassador really feel like they're being slighted, like they're not getting the president's representative on the ground. So I think we need to do a better job of getting ambassadors in place, whether political or career, and getting them into embassies overseas and doing business for America, because embassies and the country teams there are powerful exponents of the United States. It's often FBI and military folks, State Department. They call it the country team because it's really all these agencies at an embassy working to advance American interests. And I hope we don't retreat from that, because we've always had universality. We want to be everywhere because American interests are everywhere. And I think we do good work for America.
Thank you, sir, for joining the show today, for all of your stories, words of encouragement, and insights on how to become an ambassador or serve the country in foreign service. Appreciate it, and it was my honor and my pleasure.
Danny, I hope you invite me to your confirmation hearing when you become ambassador.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you. Take care.